Here's my script. Could you read it?
Okay, yeah, and move that
Let's
script over
edit
here.
this part
Yeah.
out, okay? Going 10-1.
Rain dance, sun dance, con.
Let's do this.
You guys ready?
Quiet
Thank you
on
so
set.
much for this award. Ready and action.
Welcome back to Mel Moment Mondays. I'm your host, Mel, and today I'm joined by a concert photographer who has had the opportunity to capture some of the biggest up and coming artists today, including Renee Rapp, Lipa, and Post Malone, just to name a few. DeShaun Craddock, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, let's jump right into it. Like, what got you into concert photography? I've kind of been following your work for a little while now, and it's just really fun to see all the photos that you put out and like the variety of artists that you capture as well.
Yeah, I kind of got into it. I feel like my story is not that unique. I feel like I got into it for the reason a lot of people get into it. I was just a music fan first, a concert fan. Um, and my going to concerts really started to overlap with when I was learning about photography in general. So after a while, I was like, it'd be cool to like bring a camera to a show and see how that goes. And it was just, a lot of curiosity and following that curiosity. And that's how I
Yeah.
got started. I just started going to small shows.
Did you have any like photography background, or was it just you kind of learned as you went, or what was that experience?
Yeah, I didn't have any formal photography training or education. I had been doing street photography for about like 3 or 4 years before I went to my first show with a camera and like really tried. And before that, it was just kind of like bringing a point and shoot to a show, but I wasn't really thinking about it in um, as a pursuit of something, It was just, okay, this is just a souvenir for me. Uh, yeah, but like 2012, I would say I kind of started trying a little more and saying like, oh, well, what if I bring my camera to a show and like see what I can do? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. So you talk about like bringing the camera to the show, obviously you can't just a concert goer, you can't just bring, a DSLR or a
Right.
mirrorless into a show, right? So how do you get access to shoot at a concert? I know you've shot like a range of different types of concerts as well. Can you kind of walk us through like, maybe something as a smaller venue versus like, like a music festival? How does that work of getting permission to do that?
Sure. So the good news is that when you're doing the smaller shows, your local circuit, your local venues, um, the barrier to entry is actually a lot lower than you might think. Most places you can bring a DSLR. If it's a small enough venue, they don't really have a camera policy. I mean, if you're in doubt, you can, check the website, send them a DM, do whatever you need to do to like get the okay. But for the most part, small venues, even today, you can just bring a small camera, small SLR. Don't bring like, you know, don't bring like a lighting setup or anything, but show up and yeah, you can just bring a modest camera and take pictures, get a spot near the front, hang out, move around. And then when you want to start moving into uh, medium size and larger venues and festivals and things of that nature, then yeah, you're going to need permission to bring your gear. You're going to need to be credentialed. And there are multiple ways to go through this. You can, go through a publication, a blog. You can start your own if, that's something you'd like to do. If you're interested in other aspects of um, music journalism, like if you like to do interviews, you like to write, you like to take video, then that's something where you can put together like a website and do that. But other ways, you can look out there, look for music blogs that do coverage in your area, um, and reach out to them and see if they can, help you out and if they're taking on new photographers.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like that's always kind of like the biggest question for people who want to do concert photography. They're like, how do I do the Taylor Swift or like the Coachella and stuff? And a lot of
Yeah.
it is I feel like you do have to go through a reputable source
Yeah.
to get the credentialing.
And it also takes time. I mean, you don't necessarily start at Taylor Swift, right? Um, like I I got lucky. I had a like contest win that got me my exposure to my first arena show. But the time between that, which was again a contest win and not like a proper channel, And like the next time that I went to a an arena size show, it was a few years, and it wasn't just like, oh yeah, you did one, now you can just do as many as you want. It was like, okay, you got that, but that was a different set of circumstances. So trying to go through a publication and, you know, a publication that's reputable enough, where you can gain access to a larger show, yeah, you kind of have to climb your way up. There are other ways you can go through artists, if you work with artists directly, that's a great like benefit of doing smaller places as well. You work with a small artist and then maybe they get a break and they're opening for someone who is playing at a big venue and you have a rapport with this band and they decide, hey, do you want to come and cover our show? We're doing like you've been with us all these times at these small venues. Do you want to come and cover our show? So that's another avenue.
Yeah, yeah. No, another great avenue that I feel like people also, I feel like people always assume that you'll just overnight, get the big artists, but it is like, you have to work your way up like anything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, and I mean sometimes people do just get, you get lucky. Sometimes that there is the, hey, I just had a big break and the right person noticed me at the right time, but you have to understand that that's like such a small percentage, So most people they're out there and they're working and putting in time and some people climb up faster than others and it's not necessarily an indication of like um skill or ability. It's just different people get their break at different times.
Exactly. So once you're at the venue and you have your credential and everything, what
Mhm.
are like kind of the rules of concert photography? Like there's like, the photographer area, I'm talking medium to bigger sized venues,
Yeah.
obviously. And there's like kind of rules of like when you can take pictures and like kind of the turnaround with that. Can you just like kind of explain that?
Yeah, sure. In general, I mean, like the kind of default rule is first three songs, no flash. This is the standard, but it's not always the rule. Some artists will have their own specific rules, and someone should be communicating that to you. So I would say, as like a precursor to all of this, if you're going to a show, maybe it's your first big show, your first like, bigger venue, your first time with a credential, make sure you have a point of contact. Make sure that you have someone that you can speak to in case something goes wrong, in case you get to the box office, they don't have your name, in case you get there and they're telling you something different than you were told via email. Like make sure that you have receipts for things so that you don't just seem like a random person trying to sneak in, right? And then yeah, when you're in there, just be respectful of the people who are in the venue. If the security is telling you what the rules are, um, try and follow the rules. Don't be argumentative if you can. And just be aware that like, even if you think that you're sneaking and doing something, uh, just because you get away with it that day doesn't necessarily mean that there are no consequences. Um, so to make up an example, let's say you're supposed to shoot the first three and they're telling you like strictly no photos after the first three, right? And you go in the pit, you're done, do your first three, you're back in the crowd, and you're like, you know what? Something really cool happened. I want to take a picture, more pictures from like in the crowd, and you sneak and you do that and you publish them, like as a publication. Uh, the the tour, like the tour team, the publicists, the artists, they are familiar with what their set looks like. So they know what song four looks like. They know what song six looks like. They know that if someone came out during an encore or something like that, they know when that was taken. So you're telling on yourself by revealing these photos. And um it doesn't always result in something crazy happening, like getting blacklisted or anything, but sometimes it shows up in different ways, like uh, a change in policy where now you have to check your gear after the first three, or um, not issuing tickets to photographers. You're just like, hey, you're just gonna come in, do your job, and go back home. Like these kinds of things get implemented as a form of control when they get the sentiment that they can't trust you.
Yeah, that's something I definitely hadn't thought about, because, everyone wants that, like, oh, that one picture that stands out from everyone else, and it is kind of like, you're like, oh, how much, can I like push the boundaries? But at the
Yeah.
same time, you really shouldn't because, you're capturing artists that are very public.
Right, right.
And,
And you really do it at your own risk, and in some cases at the risk of the rest of the community. And also, you don't know, you might see other people's photos and think, well, they got to do it or they got to do it, but you don't know the circumstances of their access. Maybe they are shooting for the house, the venue, and they have more access than you would. Maybe they're working with the artist that night and they have all access and you didn't. You have to, use caution.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And kind of more onto the like more creative side of it. These days I feel like a lot of concert photography plays around with a bunch of filters and special effects and everything. What has been your experience with that, and how do you think the trend is affecting, how people take pictures? You've been in the game, you said, for at least, over a decade at this point. How have you seen that changing over years with the concerts and the types of photos taken? Because, you look at concerts back in, even the early 2000s or the 70s, and that's completely different of how we take concert pictures now,
Yeah.
and it's cool to see the differences, but what has been your, your experience with that?
Um, I think that's something, it's an interesting thing that's been happening with that. Um, I think that some artists really embrace that. You can see that in certain artists, tour photographers and things like that. They embrace alternative methods of processing and different kinds of filtering and things like that. And that's the vibe that they want for the show. And they're not necessarily going for um, just a straight documentation of the events that happen, but they want to convey the mood. They want to convey the feeling, and add like a little bit of a flair to the photography, separate from like photojournalism. I think that's interesting. I think that's a cool variation in what we have. And if it's something that speaks to you and you want to experiment with that, feel free. Have I'm not one to really use filters myself. I have a pretty clean shooting style, but I like to mess with long exposure occasionally. I like to mess with yeah, slower shutter. I'm not opposed to noisy photos, things like that. Um, yeah, I think that experimentation, sometimes you come across stuff that's just really great for you, and you can make that your own unique style, and there will be people who want that.
Yeah. Like, what have been some of the challenges while shooting, like photos at a concert? You know, you you said you have a kind of a pretty clean, photography style. But what is kind of the nitty gritty of that, of like your settings and everything? Because like, I feel like that's kind of daunting for like a newer photographer or just a photographer like not used to low light.
Hmm.
Concerts are pretty low light, even if there's like a bunch of lights, coming off of the stage. So
Yeah.
what kind of is like your process with that? And like just walk us through kind of like, is there a specific setting that most people try and aim for? And you also said you're not opposed to noisy photos. I
Yeah.
feel like, a lot of people are scared with, bumping the ISO. Should that be something that people really should be scared about? Or what's your take?
Mm. Um, I think so. To answer your first question, I usually kind of put my camera in a position, like I get my settings to where I feel like I can change them easily, without, yeah, without like rolling the dials too much, So like I try to get in like a middle position. So for me, I might set my ISO to like 3200 to start, just to get in the, when I'm in the door. Nothing, I haven't seen anything yet. And, I'll have my shutter speed at something that I think is decent enough to stop motion. And my aperture will be, almost wide open. And then once the lights go down, I'll take like one or two test shots. I'll look and see, okay, is it too bright? Is it too dark? And then I just start adjusting on the fly. Being familiar with your gear is very important in this instance, because you only have so much time to get your work done. So the less time you spend checking your work, the more like dynamically you can adjust, right? And then as far as noise and like high ISO are concerned, um, I don't I don't care. Um, I, you know, I have shot I have shot shows at 1600 ISO when it's super bright, and I have shot shows at 10,000 ISO. Uh, you know, it depends on what's happening, and I think the question that I ask myself is, do you want to get the shot? So if you're kind of wringing your hands about, man, I really don't want to push my ISO any higher. I'm at 6400 ISO. I don't want to push it any higher. And you have gear that is capable. Um, if it's the difference between you getting a shot or getting nothing, then I feel like you should take the option that gets you the shot and, just mitigate the noise later. Like if it's noisy, it doesn't have to be perfectly clean. Um, to your point about photos from, the era of film, you know, think about the highest ISO film that exists, like that you can buy as a normal consumer. Most people are, 3200 ISO film is really like usually like 800 ISO film, like box rated, and then it's designed to be pushed two stops. So those photos are grainy. Those photos have high contrast. Um, I think you have to kind of be aware of the situation that you're in. If you're in a dimly lit bar somewhere, you have to understand that, like, okay, well, I have to sacrifice something to get the photo that I need. It might be a little noisy. It might be a little blurrier than I'd like. Um, but if you get the photo and you can convey the essence of what's happening, it won't matter.
Yeah, I love that advice that you just gave because I feel like that is something that people worry about is, the settings. Especially now with digital, when it's like staring you right at the face all the time,
Yeah.
people get really scared of like, oh, but it won't, I'm scared it won't look good. And then they don't get the picture. They never get the picture, but I
Yeah.
love what you said, might as well, get the picture and get what you want and deal with it later.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had a photo get nominated for an award a few years ago, and that photo was I took it on crop, a crop camera, crop sensor camera, and I was shooting at like 10,000 ISO. It was outside, it was at night, there was no lighting. So I was shooting at 10,000 ISO with a flash on, and it's very noisy, but it was, it conveyed the mood of what was happening there. It told a clear message, um, and it had good energy. And I like that photo. And it doesn't matter that to me that it's not pristine and like noise free.
Yeah, yeah. And then what's your take on like shooting like celebrities versus less well-known people? I know people, can kind of get flustered like, "Oh my gosh, this is my first show where I'm shooting XYZ,
Mhm.
artist." And they get, it's like really exciting, it's really fun, but then they worry too much about kind of more of the like their hardware or, like trying to get the best shot. What's kind of your thought on that and what's been your experience with the different levels of I guess fame?
I think that when you're starting out, those are the trenches. That's where like your technique gets tested the most because um that's gonna really put you through your paces about dealing with low, like really suboptimal lighting. You go to the place and hey, all we've got is this dim red light. Hope that's okay. Um, or it's like green and magenta, or it's, you know, dim blue or something like that. No front lighting, things like that. Getting comfortable with like adjusting to those situations and handling those situations makes getting to like the mid-tier and, arena size stuff a lot easier because those places will have better lighting. And then after that, it's about adjusting to what's happening because not everything is going to be, everything's changing all the time. People are moving, the light colors are changing, things are pulsing. You might have strobe, you might have, every song has a different color palette. Um, there are lots of things to account for. And the other thing I think that's nicer in a way about smaller venues is the level of access. If you want to get photos on stage, if you want to get photos from backstage, if you want to do portraits, you're going to have a much easier time doing that with the local band at your small venue than you are with, yeah, Dua Lipa or something like that, right? So, you know, you cut your teeth doing the easier access, and it's, yeah, harder technical work, I guess. But yeah, if you want to like really get a well-rounded, you know, uh variety of work, then doing it at the beginning, I think, with the smaller acts is way easier. And then once you get to the top, it's like um a lot of times the light will be better, but sometimes you have to sacrifice the closeness. You might have an artist who insists on a soundboard shoot, and now you are, oh great, I'm shooting at Madison Square Garden, but I'm in the back behind 40 rows of people, and this isn't the experience I thought it was going to be, right? Even though it's still a big event, you're not getting the shots that you maybe thought you would.
Right, exactly. So it's so interesting and it's just so diverse because yeah, as you said, like every stage is different and every venue is different and it's really all about adapting. How do you get your work to be seen? I mean, with this day and age with social media, I feel like it's all about marketing yourself in a certain way because you can work for like, as you said, to get the credentials and stuff, or your job might just be, you're part of a publishing company or,
Mhm.
something like that. But so many people these days, I feel like I'm seeing, if I go to a concert and then the photos that are being, used by the artist or just around, it's mostly through social media.
Mhm.
What do you think is the best way to get your work seen and like how have you like utilized social media or have you not?
Um, I think using the tools that are available within whatever social media that you're operating in is important. So if we're talking Instagram, um, you know, use your tagging with reason. Don't tag everyone under the sun. But tagging, making sure you tag the artists, and then whatever available information you have. If you know um, the publishing, like the PR firm, you can tag them. If you're shooting for a publication, tag them. Um, Sometimes it's lesser, there are other avenues that are maybe not used as much. You have a really clean shot of a guitarist and you can see like Fender on the neck of the guitar. If you think it's a really good shot, it's worth tagging brands like that. I've had drum companies reach out to me before because they like the photo that I took of a drummer. You know, if it's someone, going back to the guitar thing, if it's someone who has a signature guitar and you have a really cool shot of them using said guitar, that's an opportunity. It just gets more eyes on things. And then I think also doing outreach, you should be doing research to find out who's connected to the artists that you're photographing. So if you're working with a PR firm, or someone, make sure that they can see the work that you're doing, and then on top of that, I would say like separate from social media, just doing outreach on the side of that research. Like, yeah, I'd really like to work with this artist. Um, Reaching out to contacts that you can find, also networking with your community, but most importantly, doing that when there isn't an immediate ask, right? So like you reach out to someone, um, let's say there's a show coming up in 2 weeks and you reach out to them and you're like, hey, I'd like to shoot this for you guys. Here's my work. Um, that can work, but if you reach out to them there's nothing going on. There's nothing on the radar that you particularly want to do. You know they work with someone you like, but maybe that person's not on tour right now. And you reach out to them and you introduce yourself to, to someone who works with them. And you say, hey, here's my work. Here's what I'd like to do. Let's stay in touch. And you build that rapport and you have a relationship with them. Then when an opportunity comes up, it's that much easier to broach the topic, right? It doesn't just seem like you're coming up out of the woodwork, like, hey, I heard you are touring. Can I do this? You have a relationship and they've seen how you communicate. They've seen what kind of person you are. They've gotten a sense for what kind of person you are. And they've been able to see your work if, let's say you're sharing work with them, on a consistent basis. And that kind of warms things up a lot better than just showing up out of nowhere.
Yeah, I like that kind of. Yeah, I feel like so much of media is all about networking and all about reaching out. So doing that proactively almost is really important.
Yeah, yeah. And it doesn't always work out. That's okay. And sometimes it doesn't work out in the timeline you think it is. You might reach out to someone and be like, man, I want to do this, and I hope that the next time this artist tours, they'll think of me. And maybe they don't. But, you know, that don't let that be a reason not to still practice that. Because sometimes it
Exactly.
does work.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
Do you think camera matters? Um,
Not as much as people think. Uh, and not in the way I think a lot of people think. I don't think that like camera and gear matter as much as people think. Because I'll give an example. Sometimes you'll see someone say like, "Oh, you need the fastest lens possible, like the widest aperture possible, right? You need to have something that's like f1.8, you know, f2." And there are lenses that are f1.8, f1.2, f1.4, but let's say they focus slowly. That is not a good lens for concerts. Just because it has a wide aperture doesn't mean it's a high performing lens for that scenario. Um, you want something that can keep up with motion and keep up with what's happening around you. Um, and you also have to think about all the capabilities of your kit. So for instance, I almost never shoot wide open.
oh,
Um, my lenses are all 2.8, and I usually shoot at around like 3.5, 3.2, 3.5, just to give myself a little more margin of error for focus. Um, and I think that it's worked for me, right? And I think, I know that there's a lot of pressure to like have the latest and greatest, but I think being comfortable with your gear will get you so much further than having a flagship camera, right? So if you're shooting with, a Sony A1 or a Nikon Z9, uh, an R5, those are great cameras, but you may not need everything that it has on offer. And if you're not capable of tapping into all of that, then it will go to waste, or create bigger problems for you. Like I rented a Nikon Z8, and it has a really high continuous shutter speed. And I took it to a show, and I was like, let me just try shooting in burst. I don't usually shoot in burst. I was like, let me just try shooting in burst. And I didn't like it because when I got home, I was like, I have too many photos to go through, and I don't like this process. Like, was it cool to be able to do that and feel like I had that kind of buffer of like not missing the moment? Sure. But it created a bigger editing task for me when I got home. I had way more photos than I wanted to deal with, and it made more work for me at the end of the night. So I think that just, yeah, operating, not always aiming to have the like top of the line thing, but having what works best for you. I've been using I just recently, I mean, within the last 3 years, changed my camera. And I was using the same camera from 2014 until 2022. And I don't think that you can look at my portfolio and say like, oh, this was shot with the older camera and this was shot with the newer camera. Um, it's really just, make sure you have gear that is capable. And yeah, you're gonna run into situations where you're like, you know what, my camera can't, it's struggling in this situation. But it create that limitation kind of creates it breeds creativity. Like, how do I work around this limitation? Right? I only have so much headroom for my ISO. It doesn't focus that quickly, or I have this problem or that problem. How do I work around it? And sometimes like bells and whistles kind of get in our way. Like I've seen people complain about like eye tracking and stuff like that. Like a lot of newer cameras have that. They have like eye tracking and face tracking, and those things fail in really low light situations, and they fail more frequently than just using a regular like focus point. So sometimes the tech gets in your way, and you have to be able to get familiar enough to say like, okay, let me turn this off and let me just use it in a simpler mode, and you'll get better results.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of going along with that, like if you're starting out, what advice would you give someone that's starting out in concert photography besides the camera, not worrying too much about what camera you have starting out? What other advice? Like, people come in nervous about it or they want, they have aspiring photographers that they want to be like and they put themselves in a position to almost fail because of their expectations on themselves. What's your advice to them?
First advice, be comfortable failing. You are going to. It's like um, it's hard to do. Don't expect to just show up and like knock it out of the park the first time. Um, and understand that like the first time you do feel like you really nailed it, you're gonna have many, many, many of those, right? Because you're gonna progress and you're gonna get better. So what you feel was like, oh, this is the best shoot I've ever had. You're gonna have multiple best shoots you've ever had, right? Um, so yeah, let yourself screw up, let yourself learn from your mistakes, look at what you did, think about what you can do better, allow yourself to experiment. Um, yeah, I think that's a huge thing to do. And it's fine to like try and emulate the work of people that you like. That's I think how a lot of originality gets birthed actually. Like it's a mutation of some kind of emulation. It's like, okay, I wanted to do something like this. And then along the way, I did this thing, I stumbled upon this thing, and now that's my style. Uh, yeah, I think just being open to the failure, open to the experimentation. Start with things that you really enjoy, you know, um, because it makes that struggle easier to deal with. You go to a show that you like, go to, shoot genres that you like, shoot venues that you feel comfortable in. Uh, and I feel like that helps to neutralize some of the nerves. And it doesn't really go away. I still get nervous, depending on like what I'm doing and how high the stakes are.
Yeah, I love that. Just be open to anything,
Yeah.
really. And what's your favorite part of the process? Like why do you do this? Because you said you switched you know, from street photography to concerts, and you've been doing concerts now more readily. Like why do you keep doing this?
Um, I think there are a lot of parallels between street photography and concert photography. There's like an improvising part to it, where you show up and you don't really know what's going to happen. Uh, you might have an idea. You might be familiar with the venue or familiar with the band or familiar with, if, in terms of street photography, you may have been to this street corner before, you may have been here at this time of day, but you don't know who's showing up. You don't know what's going to happen. And you have to kind of train your eye to be sensitive to what's going on around you and not only be sensitive to it, but like understanding how to isolate what you want to show people, right? So something happens and you're like, okay, this is happening over here. I want to show this like fraction, this segment of the entirety of the show. Um, I love being able to do that. I love being able to kind of like treat it as a problem to solve. Like, okay, well, what's going on? What's going on around me? And how do I capture that? I really like I really like challenging light. I enjoy shooting strobe. I enjoy shooting like spotlight stuff. I I find that to be like an exciting challenge. Like, how can I freeze this motion? How can I capture what's going on in this moment? That's kind of my favorite thing, treating it like a problem to solve.
I love that. Yeah, it's so dynamic and so unique every venue, everything, just photography in general. There's always something that comes up.
Yeah, for sure. And it's cool when you can, you get to put it's a really nice marrying of technical and creative because, you can sure it's nice to be able to show like how good the lighting was and everything, but when you do that and also you get like the emotion in the performer's face or the action of the fans or the scale of the venue, whatever it is that you're trying to convey, when you pick all of that up, it's just that much more special, Just
Yeah.
getting the exposure right is like the tip of the iceberg. It's, all the other pieces that are moving.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. Yeah. I kind of forgot where I left off. But that's a perfect segue into kind of doing the film Would You Rather. It's just one question kind of pertaining to like what we've been talking about. So today
Yeah.
that would be concert photography. And my question is for you. Would you rather um shoot concert photography in a really huge arena or at a smaller venue? You kind of have the option now with your experience to kind of have both. What would you choose?
Um, if those are my only choices, if it's like a big arena or a small venue, I'm gonna pick the small venue.
Really?
Um, yeah, I'm gonna pick a small venue. Um, Arenas have honestly, they have so many restrictions. A lot of times there's a lot to deal with. Um, I mean, if you have all access at an arena, that's awesome. You can go wherever you want. But assuming that you're just doing this as press, and you're limited to first three, and that's it. Small venue, you're there for the whole show. You know, um, you can hang out usually. It's it feels more intimate. You can get closer. You can, yeah, there's just a lot more variety in what you can get. You can move around freely in a small venue. You can get the close-up shot. You can get the far away shot. Um, at an arena, a lot of times everything you do is like very strictly controlled. If I go to a show at Madison Square Garden, the protocol is like, okay, meet me at this entrance at this time, and we will escort you to where you need to be. And then when you're done, we will escort you out, right? And that's the end, right? So while that can be exciting in terms of like caliber of artist, uh, it's not the most enjoyable thing, you know. I have a much better time when I'm able to really like embrace the entirety of the show. And I think I do better work in that scenario as well. You get to get a feel for what's happening around you. You get to experiment more. If you only have three songs and no additional access anywhere else, you may not get the opportunity to think about, oh, let me try this angle, or let me try this focal length, or let me try this filter or slow shutter or whatever. You don't have the same freedom. Um, but in a small venue where you can kind of just like, yeah, the light may not be as good. But again, that kind of restriction breeds some kind of creativity. And you're like, oh, well, let me try this, let me try that. Let's see what this is about. And you can really make a whole photo story out of that as opposed to, okay, well, here's the first three. Um, and there's more opportunity to make photos that are uniquely yours.
I love that. And then kind of just the final question that I ask everyone on this podcast is, if you could tell your younger self, what advice would you give them starting out in the career that you're doing?
Be more patient. Um, be more patient. There are so many things uh that feel like a build of momentum and like things are going to start happening quickly. And they just won't, you know. You'll have false starts, you'll have things that look like opportunity that end up not being. You'll have things that feel like they're going to be good relationships that just fizzle. Um, and there will be a lot of people who won't answer you or, all kinds of things like that. But be patient, um, keep poking and looking around and finding other ways to get in. If this door won't open, try another one, go around back, like whatever you need to do to figure out an alternate way to get to do what you want to do. Um, that will serve you very well.
I love that. Patience is key, guys. Patience is key.
Yeah,
Well,
and I mean honestly, it's
yeah.
I remember I shot for I was lucky enough to shoot for Rolling Stone a couple of times,
Oh,
and
wow.
I met the editor for Rolling Stone 6 years before I got my first assignment. It wasn't like I met him and he saw my work and was like, "Wow, okay, go to an assignment tomorrow." You know, we knew each other. We would run into each other at shows after a while. Um, And then, yeah, it wasn't until 6 years later and it wasn't something that I pitched. I had been pitching for a while, and then just kind of randomly, um, they contacted me and they were like, "Hey, are you free? Are you free later this week?" Um, and that's how that, came about. So I know sometimes it feels like you're hitting your head against the wall with things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that no one's looking, um, just because it's not progressing the way as fast as you would like. Sometimes people are noticing, and it just doesn't line up when you want it to, but it does line up.
I love that. Yeah. That's I feel like just so key for the media industry. It's just, like keep putting out work,
Yeah,
keep reaching out. It'll happen. It just
yeah, and it
yeah.
may not look exactly the way you want it, but something will happen. And so many I've done so much reading of like interviews from editors and creative directors and things like that. And something that a lot of people end up saying, about what they want to see from people that they hire, they want to see the work, right? They want to see like, um, they want to see that you're trying to do the thing that you want to be hired for, right? So they're like, okay, if I go to your website and you're telling me you want to do artist portraits and I don't see any artist portraits, then I don't know if I can trust you to do artist portraits. Um, and I don't know, there's a lot of back and forth. You have to have conversations with yourself, think about what it is that you want. Because I had a point where I had a bunch of different things on my portfolio because I thought it was what people wanted to see. Um, and I got to a point where I was like, well, what do I want to do? And what do I want to see? What do I want to do more of? And I made sure that, I took some time and made sure that the work that I was showing was only the stuff that I wanted to do.
I
It
love
sends a
that.
clear message to the people that you speak to.
Yeah. No, that's it's so important to like actually like what you're doing, not just to
Yeah.
appease people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. How can people find you and your work?
So my handle for pretty much everything is the same. It's Deshaunicus, DeshauniCus. So I'm on Instagram. I have a Twitter. I barely use it. Um, and my website is dac.photography.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a fun chat and like, it's just it's fun talking to all these different creatives and hearing how passionate they are of what they do and it's just fun.
I appreciate you having me. It was fun to chat.
If you enjoyed this podcast and want to learn more about my experience as an up and coming filmmaker,
or catch up on more episodes, follow me on Instagram at MELYDE12. This podcast is also available on Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Please like, subscribe, and spread the word. Thank you guys again, and that's a wrap.